Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Flowers, and I'm on the Professional Development Committee, and I coordinate the webinars. And thank you so much for joining us this morning in beautiful May. Hopefully it's beautiful for everyone this morning. And we are lucky to have Josh Gana from University of Washington and Brian Stroup from the Oregon State University with us this morning to talk about coalition building, how to get things done. So I'm going to let them take it away. As you have questions, you're welcome to type them into the meeting chat, and Josh and Brian will answer them as they can. So here you go, Josh and Brian.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate. Good morning, everyone. This is Brian Stroup, like Kate said, down at Oregon State University. I work in our operations unit here, most specifically. I'm one of our associate directors, and within that do a lot of work with assignments, billing, emergency management, and many other fun areas. But appreciate you all taking the time to talk with Josh and I this morning on coalition building. One thing we wanted to note is towards the end of this presentation, there's going to be some discussion questions that we're hoping that folks will kind of write in responses to that Josh and Kate and I can speak to as we finish up today, to have just a little bit of an element of interaction for the content that we're discussing. For folks that were at Northwest Akuho, this is a program that we presented at Northwest Akuho, but have adapted a little bit for this webinar, and thank you all again for being here with us. So for our time this morning, as we look at an overview, and in just a few minutes here, I'll have Josh introduce himself before I get into my section here. The one piece that is, as we talk about coalition building, it kind of comes up in overall two main areas of relationship building and project management. So relationship building is a section that I'll be speaking to specifically as we talk about how to build these relationships in order to have strong coalitions as you're leading groups and teams in your work environment. And then Josh will really dig into a lot of the Project Management 101 basics as you're leading a group, as you're facilitating a team, how to do that most effectively, most productively. The case study piece, I apologize, I didn't update that text there. It's actually the discussion questions that we'll be talking about as it relates to this topic, and then have some time for questions at the end. Before I jump to the first section, Josh, do you want to give a shout-out and introduce yourself to the group real quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I currently serve as Assistant Director for Facilities and Operations here at University of Washington, essentially the facilities and maintenance portfolio here. And, you know, one of the things that really intrigued me about this topic and why Brian and I put this together is we both kind of found ourselves transitioning into mid to upper management roles outside of residential life. You know, I'm in a relatively technical field, and I'm not a technical guy, so trying to really question what my role as a leader in this organization is, and I found a lot of it was getting the right people together to do the right things. And so as I've coached and worked with other professionals transitioning, that's been a big discussion point, and so we tried to encapsulate some of those tips in this presentation.
That is perfect. Thanks, Josh. So the first section that I wanted to spend some time talking about is this concept of relationship building. And I'm glad, Josh, you mentioned a little bit more about your background. Like Josh mentioned, both Josh and I came from residential life, residential education backgrounds before our positions outside of that area. And what's I think one of the most beneficial things in having that progression and having one of the entry-level positions within housing, be a resident director, is you learn right away, if you didn't know it before, that relationships are so key and important into the work we do. They're the foundation of our work, not only in housing, but in student affairs as well. There's a speaker that comes to campus here at Oregon State named Paul Extell from the Midwest, and one thing he always speaks to when he does courses on conversation skills and relationship development and building is that a relationship is a series of conversations. And this has always really stuck with me, and as we talk about coalition building and having strong relationships with other people that we work with, it takes time. It's not a one-and-done type of thing. It takes time, and it takes lots of intentionality. And so being able to invest that time to foster those relationships is really important. And it doesn't matter what part of housing you're a part of. It's very crucial. It doesn't matter if you're in facilities or in marketing, diversity, operations, or res ed, whatever. It's an integral part of our work, and if it's something that is something that you don't enjoy or is not something that is very central to how you do things, then it's potentially a sign that within housing and student affairs it may not be the most ideal field for you, because it's such a cornerstone of how we do our work. And it helps, the stronger you are in this area, the more successful you'll be in your role and in the work you do. And so, obviously, with that piece of, they're really important, they're integral to our work, but which ones do we take time to build as we think about coalition building? And so a good starting place to look at is within your own position description. Your position description ideally is updated every year as part of a performance review process. If it isn't currently, I highly recommend that, just to update even basics of committee work and language, that things can change in our roles in housing pretty rapidly. From academic year to academic year. So having your position description most accurately reflect the work that you do is really important, but it serves as a roadmap or a guide of who you spend time with in your work environment and in your work role. And so looking at your position description for those key individuals or offices that you do some interaction with. So, for example, in my role here at Oregon State with operations, one of the big areas I'm responsible for is our overall occupancy management and projection planning. And so in my position description, it speaks specifically to that as a key element of what I do, is that occupancy management piece and that bigger picture level. And so the Department of Admissions, New Student Programs and Family Outreach, and enrollment management as a whole are really called out. And so I've taken strides to reach out to those staff members, the director and assistant directors in those areas, to make sure that my relationships with them are strong. So as we do our work together, it's successful, but I also have that really solid relationship for any other things that might come up in our work environment moving forward. And so the position description is really a great place to start to see who you interact with that it would be great to create a bond with if you don't already. And so once you've done that, another thing to do is to print out your department or institution's org chart and see where these individuals that you would like to connect with and build that relationship with are located. It's really important to build relationships both above and below your current position level. And this is something that's, I think, really important. I want to emphasize for any of those that are in entry-level positions that might be on the phone or know of folks or supervised staff that are in this position, is that it's a skill that it spans position levels, and building relationships with others in your work environment needs to be across those different areas of people a couple steps above you or a couple steps below to be able to best understand the work that they do, but also to stretch yourself as a professional to kind of build that network with those different individuals. And so it's creating this kind of a relationship map through org charts is a nice visual way to see, because context is hugely important in the work that we do and with people and where they are. There's a lot of institutional history that's captured within different individuals and their positions. And so knowing where a staff member sits within their organization, who their supervisor is, who they supervise, can help you in that context piece of when you start to build these relationships, so that you're aware of the big picture and how they fit into that, as we are all agents of the institution and fitting into the larger mission of student success and retention in the higher education environment. So how do these people fit into that overall mission and goal? And that helps as you're building that relationship. Another piece is to really connect with with these individuals on a kind of a prioritization level. And so keeping in mind time of year, planning that you might be doing, projects you might be working on, and that they might be working on. And so really thinking about what is a way to really balance pursuing this goal and connecting with people that's really sustainable. And so for me, one thing I try to think of is if I'm able to create or continue to foster one relationship a month with another staff member, I'm feeling really good about that. It's not going to overload me. It allows me to be able to stay up on all the other areas that I'm responsible for, but it's still carving out just a little bit of time each month to stay committed to this topic and this concept of developing and deepening these relationships with other individuals. And so, for me also, September with opening and for a lot of us, it's not really a good month to do that. But and so thinking about those months that are more challenging for yourself or for those that have a lot going on. So if you're connecting with someone from new student programs who does summer orientation, maybe not trying to carve out initial time to kind of get to know them better in June, July, and August. Probably not the best time. And so being really thoughtful about who you connect with first based on that time of year and what else is happening for them and for yourself. And so when you're reaching out to someone, this can seem as kind of a daunting task. This is obviously taking the leap of faith, sending the email, making the phone call to say, hey, I would like to meet up and connect with you and learn a little bit more about what you do. And as we've been talking, it's probably related to the work that you do if you're basing it off of your position description and connection with the work that's relevant for your role. But make it easy for them. Make it pretty informal. And if it helps with the individual to make it a little bit formal, have a thing or two that you could talk about that's work-related and then be able to use the rest of that time of that 30-minute piece or 1 hour, whatever you set up, to get to know them a little bit more. It's really ideal to do this as far as it feeling less awkward and a lot more natural when a staff member is new to the university. So when they're new to their department or to their role, maybe it was an internal search and they shifted positions, that's a really great time to take advantage of reaching out and connecting with an individual that is very natural and kind of welcoming them to their role or to the institution or both. For myself, one time I remember specifically I did this, it was 2 years ago, we had a new director of risk management come on board at the institution, someone who was easily 3 or 4 position levels above where I was at the time, but wanted to reach out to him because there's one program that we work with a lot in the department that has a large risk management piece to it, and wanted just to meet him and talk about that and connect with him. And ever since then, I know who he is, he knows my name, and meetings, different interactions, it just continues to build off of that, and it's created this really great connection that's come to fruition in emergency management scenarios and a lot of other involved in areas that wouldn't have been the same if I hadn't made that investment of 30 minutes of time to talk about something and welcome them to the institution. And so when connecting to someone, connecting in a way that's natural for you is really, really important. You don't want to stretch yourself to where it's uncomfortable and then it's a really challenging interaction for you to build that relationship. So whether that's coffee, lunch, or in a more official meeting, whatever it might be in someone's office, do what's natural. And if you do some sort of a coffee or a lunch or things like that, it's always nice, of course, to offer to host that for the other individual as far as courtesy for them making time to meet with you and talk. But kind of know your audience of who that individual is and what they would find most natural and enjoyable. And thinking of location with this as well, there's locations on every campus where it's a really distracting environment, so maybe that's not the environment you want to have for this interaction to build this relationship. A place I know of, for example, here at OSU, that I make a point not to use when I connect to someone is in our student union. There's a coffee place that has lots of tables set up in kind of a main walkway area, and it doesn't matter how long I'm there. There's at least one person I know that'll come by and say, hey, and being there for 30 minutes to an hour could definitely have several interruptions and disrupt from that time connecting with that other individual. And after you've had time to connect with someone, the follow-up is really important to really show that that valuing of the time that they spent to be with you, to talk about their role and how you can better work together and just to get to know them better. If possible, same-day response is ideal to really show that intentionality for how genuine and how helpful it was for you. And so it could be a quick email. It could be a handwritten note. That's nice, too, but that will take just a little bit longer to get to the individual, probably through campus mail. But that turnaround is really important. And it doesn't have to be too daunting or speak too much. Thanking them for the time that they spent with you and particularly talking about X, Y, or Z. Hope they have a great rest of the term. Thanks again. And having a template that you can tweak for when you have these interactions and these contacts that makes it really easy to do that quick follow-up, that you're not recreating the wheel every single time. And then after you've interacted, you've had the interactions with the individual, maintaining that connection. And so this is where social media, I think, can be really beneficial when it's used appropriately. within various platforms, as you can see here, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, whatever it is, but making sure that your profiles on these areas are updated and they're professional and they're mindful of you're mindful of how you put yourself out there on them. So if you don't want them to be too professional, but because you want it to be authentic to who you are, just be thinking about what you comment and what you say, because it is definitely an area that after you've made a connection with someone, if they want to get to know a little bit more about you, it's a very natural thing that this is where people will go to find that out. And so just keeping that in mind, these platforms also really make it so that it's easy to do a quick check-in with someone down the road, whether it's a direct message in Twitter or it's a quick comment on Facebook. It's a way to keep in touch with kind of common topics or experiences that they're having that you can share with them for the next time that you have an in-person interaction. It can build that. And I think we've all experienced this a little bit in some of the conferences we've attended, and using these tools after the conference is over is a great way from an overall profession standpoint to use this, but the same is true on your campus as well. And another way to continue to maintain the connection is when you're in a building that the other staff member is located in, stop by, say hi. And so as you're heading to a meeting in another building and you know someone's there you may want to stop by and say hi to, leave a few minutes early, give yourself some of that time. This is also a great way to connect a colleague of yours or someone that you're supervising to another staff member on the campus. If you're walking across campus with them, it's a great way to naturally connect them with someone else that they may not feel comfortable kind of fully putting themselves out there and connecting with them, but it provides them that natural gateway and really easy access that if they then want to jump off of that starting point of, hey, we met earlier today, et cetera, it's a nice ease in for them that you're providing. And so making a point, just take a few moments to do that can be really helpful. And then another way to continue to maintain the connection is setting up calendar reminders. Unless something is written down or you're being pinged about it and reminded, it may not happen. And so if you really want to reconnect with someone at a certain point in time, put a reminder in your calendar. Make sure that it happens. If there isn't a structured way already to continue to do that. Some meetings that meet infrequently is a great way to do that, and then making a point to arrive to them a little bit early so that you can have some of that interaction is one way to do it. But whether it's Outlook, Google Calendar, whatever it may be, or any sort of reminder task service like AnyDo or anything like that is a great way to do that. And also, kind of lastly, as we talk about relationships, is there's a lot of great resources out there. I mean, I've obviously shared some thoughts and tips here just in this little bit, but a couple I wanted to highlight that I've run across over the last couple of years. First one is Business Class, Etiquette Essentials for Success at Work. It is a great basics book for any new or seasoned professional on the broad spectrum of professional etiquette, so it'll go anywhere from dress and attire to meals to mingling, all the way up to building a network and connecting with people like we've been talking about. It just provides a lot of great examples and information. And then Never Eat Alone and Other Secrets to Success, One Relationship at a Time. That is definitely a very jam-packed book full of networking how-tos. It's very easy to read. It's pretty fun to read. The author's perspective is more of a salesperson perspective that's evolved over time, and it's really got some great information in it, and it is an enjoyable read. But it's looking at that overall broader networking perspective of if you're able to connect and build relationships with people who know a lot of other people, it kind of is a mega relationship, if you will, or a super connector that you're interacting with, because it broadens your network and people who can speak highly of your skills and abilities instantly when you make a connection with someone like that. So it really kind of speaks to that, which is a really interesting concept. So a couple resources there, and there's a lot out there that's available. I really encourage you to take a look, but remember that this is an important part of our work, but it's also an important part of our success as professionals. And so I think I'll turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Brian. So he did a great job of really laying out the foundation of how we interact with people and kind of build that capital, the coalitions that we need to get things done. And so I'm going to transition a little more on the tactical specific side of what are some tools and resources we can use when we're working through project management. And for this purpose, we're kind of talking about a project as being a temporary activity designed to produce a unique product, service, or result. So this typically doesn't refer to the day-to-day things that we do every day, all the time. It's just part of our job. But those extras, the time that you're developing a new marketing plan for room selection or an RA recruitment process or building a new building that have some specific components that make a little bit of thought and intentionality really valuable. Although certainly some of the tips we're going to talk about can play into those routine operations and hopefully increase your efficiency there as well. But kind of use this definition as we talk through this to frame the type of thing we're looking at here. When we talk about project management, which is the role in housing as generalists many times we find ourselves in, the application of knowledge, skills, and techniques to execute projects efficiently and effectively. And as I mentioned before, in my role now, I often find myself in the position of project management in arenas that I'm not the expert in. And so my job is really to move that process forward without being the expert in any specific area. And that's a niche that is often overlooked in our profession and a skill that I find we haven't always done a great job at preparing our newer professionals at doing. And so that's kind of what we're looking at here. As we look to the 5 phases of any project, and we'll look at each of those, you start out with initiation. You've got to know what you're talking about. And then moving into the planning phase, that's one that is, again, often not enough attention goes into the planning phase. I was looking at a project that we're working on here at the University of Washington to build a new food service kiosk. And as I was doing the timeline, the actual construction period of this project is 4 months, 3-4 months. The planning phase is 9 or 10 months. And so you've got a little bit of a mismatch there in the planning and the execution, but it's important because if you do that planning phase right and pay attention to it, the execution will be easy and seamless. Monitoring and controlling, that's where the project manager comes in when you're moving forward, and then closing out, and that closeout period often is overlooked as well. And so, people get done and they're excited with whatever the outcome is. Going back and evaluating what you've done is critical there. So I've got 10 top tips, and we'll talk about each one of those and then wrap up with questions. The number one tip, which is really beneficial at the start of a project, is make sure that you're really clear about project details. And whether you're the member of a project team, the project manager, or the person that has initiated a project and delegated to another group to accomplish, this is really important. And knowing what the scope is, who are the stakeholders, what's the budget, do you have a budget, can you spend money, do you suggest spending money? What is the outcome intended to do? What success look like, and are there timeline restrictions? Because any one of these key factors, if you don't really know what you're looking at, you can get into the project management process and get down these little rabbit holes and start talking about something that either doesn't meet the need of what your supervisor asked you to do, you can't afford, or you have no way of determining whether you've been successful or not. And that can be super frustrating for everybody. And so I would suggest if you're the project manager, talking with your supervisor or whoever's charged you in that role about these things beforehand, and often documenting them on paper and using it as an official charge statement for that project team. And then referring back to that as you go through to make sure that you're in line with what the expectations are. So we talk about identifying the team and the requirement. I firmly believe here, as indicated in this graphic, that if you've got the right people in the room, you can make the right decisions. But they must know what they're trying to accomplish. And so that gets back to those requirements and knowing what success looks like and trying to figure out, have we met our purpose or met our goal? I also, in this case, would urge you, depending on what the project you're dealing with is, to really use some discretion in who you pick for that team. Sometimes people want to be part of a process just because they feel like they should, or it may be egos involved, or it could be a situation where, my position I think I should be sitting around this table. That's not usually an effective or efficient use of people's time. And so really paring down and making sure you've got the right people, but you don't have 30 people on a project team just because we're in higher ed and we like to, work by committee. So sometimes that's a tough conversation, but you can, if there's somebody that may think they need to be part of it and they really don't have a role other than, needing some check-ins at certain points in time, reach out to that person and say, look, we're really trying to keep this a lean and mean team to be efficient, but I'll kind of connect with you at certain points in this process to make sure we're meeting your needs. And that can be an effective tool to kind of tamp those egos down a little bit. So that's the identifying team and requirements. Now, as the project leader, which is kind of what we're talking about, either in an official role or an unofficial role, it's really important to kind of get some perspective on what you want to accomplish in that role. And to start out with what you don't want to accomplish is you don't want to be the person that's doing all the work yourself. That's not your role. That isn't effective, and if that was the case, you don't need a team to do that. So to really be effective and rise kind of above the din of the weeds, so to speak, as a project leader, you focus on team dynamics. Do you have, again, the right people, the right culture, the right goals, the tone, the right meeting setup and structure? You manage the timeline. And for me, I say one of the things that I do in project meetings to sound like the smartest guy in the room when I'm not is always to keep an eye on the timeline and budget. And when we're making decisions, talk about the impact it has on the timeline or budget, because those are kind of your two discrete deliverables in any project. In construction, on the facility side, that's super relevant. But even on, again, back to that RA selection process, at the end of the day, you've got to have RAs in the seat by a certain point in time. And so to back up from that, that's a real good use of your time. Managing relations with stakeholders, and that gets back to, you don't want everyone sitting around the table. So your role as the project manager is to identify who needs to be around the table and also who around you needs to be wrapped in at certain points in time, either through direct outreach, email communications, or other ways that make sure they're invested but not wasting time. And then communication, and that gets back to documenting what you've done in a meeting and sending it out and just making sure that everyone's real clear and on the same page. What you don't do is all the work yourself. And if you kind of pay attention to these two areas, I believe that you can look really smart without knowing what you're talking about from a technical perspective. Number 4 is kind of back on that scheduling piece, defining what project milestones are critical in a project. And this is a graphic from a project we're working on, and it's a Microsoft project schedule, but there are 100 different ways you can track this. And what we've done in this case is highlighted in yellow a go, no-go point, which is signing a contract with a certain entity. And until that's done, we had committed to not moving forward with any additional work. And what this really helps me to do, being responsible for delivery of this project but not having control in a lot of areas, is when the conditions change, I can go back with this timeline and say, okay, well, this X, Y, or Z was delayed 2 weeks, and, it just becomes a math equation. If that's delayed, everything below it gets delayed, and it all of a sudden isn't kind of a values conversation about needing to crunch a schedule and get it done. It's very logical, and, okay, well, this is delayed, and so that means this is the result. It helps build credibility. It also helps set expectations with other stakeholders who aren't in the day-to-day details of that project. So find what works for you and your team. This is a very linear way that facilities work can get done, but for in terms of a timeline, just even print it out, a backdated schedule, all of those things can help you depending on what your project is. Communication is critical, but doing it in the right way is even more critical. What I've shown here is what I call the Peril of 1,000 emails, and this is from a couple years ago, a project we're working on, and if you see there, I think are like 20 emails in the course of a 30-hour period related to a specific topic, and you can kind of imagine how that reply all starts getting, and a person adds a sentence, and then a different person doesn't read the whole chain and answers a question that's already been answered, and you end up with an inbox that looks like this, especially if you've been in meetings all day, and you're like, well, what do I do with this? So, I'm not always a fan of meetings, but this issue is an example where a meeting would have prevented this kind of blah, and probably within 15 or 20 minutes, either over the phone or in person, we would have gotten to a decision and moved forward instead of the peril of 1,000 emails. So I'm really cognitive to that, and it's something in my world that people just, I think we've moved more and more to disconnected communication. Sometimes just picking up that phone will save you a lot of time on the back end. Pertinent documentation, again, this is kind of back to that follow-up piece. One of the adages that I like to use is if something wasn't written down, it wasn't done or it wasn't decided. And as a project manager, I think one of the biggest pieces of value I can add is keeping track of decisions that were made, sending them out, and holding folks accountable. This graphic is an example of one tool I use. It's Microsoft OneNote to take meeting notes without having to do kind of formal minutes, but dragging in on a specific issue. It's driven by a particular meeting, and you can see it populates all of the attendees for you. And then I've just kind of done a bullet point list of who committed to do what. And it may seem a little bit pedantic at the time, but I can't tell you the number of times where I've gone back from a meeting a year or a year and a half ago where somebody owed us something, and because that was documented, we were able to go back and have them follow through on that. Or, as I get older and more kind of projects in the works, I forget things. And so being able to go back to a program design we made 2 years ago and refresh my memory about why that decision was made has just been invaluable. It helps hold people accountable both in the moment and in the long term. So, again, I'd recommend finding a tool that works for you. This model works really well for me and has been effective in that role. Managing risk is also a big role of that project manager. I say it's getting global domination by foreseeing risks and initiating corrective action. It's really kind of setting up what those bumper lanes are and making sure your project doesn't get outside of those. Everything we do, be it a construction project or marketing campaign, has certain risks and rewards associated with it. By thinking about those risks beforehand, you can figure out how to mitigate them and make them a non-issue before they go wrong, or accept them and say, if we do this, that means this may happen, and by having that conversation, you can kind of prepare folks if something goes south. This kind of gets a little more specific, again, kind of back in the facilities arena. If we're working on a construction project and midway through the project, we make a decision to change all the showers to a different type of shower, right? Well, that has timeline and cost risk associated with it. And so then it becomes a decision of, well, is the outcome worth these risks of potentially being late or going over budget, or is it not? And that conversation is really valuable one to have. Number 8 is avoiding the scope creep. We talked kind of right at the start of this section about making sure we have defined requirements. And that you don't always want to get too formal about that because we want to be nimble and flexible. But at some point, especially when we're talking about IT projects, for instance, there's a habit of adding one more feature and adding one more feature. And, well, can we do this and can we add that? And we build a new building, we get the same thing, we get users starting to see the walls go up, and, well, can we change this, can we change that? And there needs to be some room for that, but at some point that room has got to stop or you'll never finish, and you'll end up with this lingering project that never ends, never ends, never ends. And so where I kind of get back to how do you define this scope creep, new elements to a project that weren't conceptualized before are probably creeping that scope beyond what it originally was, and that may be something that becomes phase 2. It happens maybe after you open a building, or you do initial rollout, or you go through 1 year of a campaign, and then you do these new elements, versus the unforeseen conditions that come up, and in that case, it may be appropriate to change the scope. And so if you're doing a renovation in a building, and you tear open a wall, and you find something that is inside that wall that you don't expect, that is an unforeseen condition, and you probably need to react with it within a project. But As I said, if you've all of a sudden got a resident director that wants their apartment to be 3 bedrooms versus 2 bedrooms in their new building, that's probably a new element. And you can probably think through the different things you interact with and identify what areas are scope creep and what aren't. They can be really detrimental, though, because you never get closure on a project if you keep expanding the scope. You never deliver anything. So that's important. And this is kind of back to that scope creep point. Appropriate planning on the front end really is important. And we've got this Dilbert cartoon with the boss saying, is it too late to give our product a low battery indicator? I'd have to work day or night for a month. My health would decline and I'd miss all my objectives. And then he's saying, the manager, I just realized that other people's problems make me all warm inside. But there is an impact to adding and creeping a scope, and that impact may not be always visible to management, but it's important. Number 9 is testing your deliverables, and again, this is kind of a nebulous statement, but whatever you're trying to accomplish, you want to make sure you're doing that. So if you're designing a self-selection process for room selection online, have you had some focus groups actually look at your product and make sure it meets their needs? Have you load tested it to make sure your server's not going to crash when you go live? Is it meeting the needs of your supervisor if they're the one that charged you to do this and are paying for it? If the answer is yes, good, you've done a good job. If the answer is no, you better have a good explanation about why your product isn't meeting that expectation, because that probably reflects not the best project management in the world. So I would argue that every project needs some sort of testing plan associated with it, and that can be informal all the way to a very formal plan to make sure it is what you want it to be. And tip number 10, and this is the one that comes back after the project is completed, and sometimes we don't like to do it because we've moved on to the next project, is that evaluation phase. Here at the UW, we're in a pretty aggressive construction master plan, which is a 10-year multiple building plan, and so if we didn't take time to evaluate after each time we built a new building, we wouldn't be able to incorporate what we learned from that into the next one. And so then you start getting 4 or 5 or 6 buildings with the same mistake. And so by taking a step back and looking at lessons learned, mistakes, what worked well, documenting and sharing, that next project team can learn and really meet the needs of what we want. You know, again, back to this room selection process, if you've implemented self-selection and all of a sudden you go live and you go through a year and you get 100 student questions about a particular feature, that's probably something you evaluate and, okay, we've got a disconnect here, let's fix that for next year, versus not evaluating and just rolling it out again as is and not learning from that mistake. So I would argue in my experience, if you pay attention to these 10 tips and some of the framework we've set, that you'd likely be pretty successful in managing projects, and there are a couple of resources that are available. There's actually an industry certification in project management through the Project Management Institute if that's kind of a career direction you want to move towards. Otherwise, that website's got some just great tips and resources. Also, Villanova University's executive training has some great resources as well. At this point, we're going to move into the discussion questions, so I'd encourage you to get your typing fingers ready. Otherwise you get to listen to Brian, Kate, and I for another 10 minutes or so, but we'll also have an open question, so if you have anything general you want to talk about in the meeting chat, go for it. So Brian?
All right, thanks, Josh. So we wanted to pose some questions out there to the group to think about and hopefully get some responses to, and you can see them here on the screen. And maybe what we'll do is I'll read through the first one and see if we get some responses coming in and go from there. So the first one being, are meetings an effective use of time? And I think one piece to this that Josh mentioned, and it's a great screenshot that he got of that email queue or inbox of when a meeting would have been appropriate, and it probably would have taken about 5 or 10 minutes to have a conversation that could have eliminated, I think it was at least 20 or 30 reply all emails. But are meetings an effective use of time? comment came through. Meetings have a cost, even if it involves salaried positions. Very true. The cost of staff time is really important to consider when getting people around the table, and even more important when you're thinking about other departments and what some of their staff members' salary cost of time might be. Definitely an important consideration. And then another comment of email also has a cost, which is true. Staff being in meetings and then having emails like Josh showed doesn't save a whole lot on that time piece when they're caught up doing that. Do others have thoughts on this?
Yeah, Brian, I would say, this is Kate, it's really important when you're scheduling a meeting or looking at a meeting to have a purpose for the meeting. You know, asking yourself, why exactly are we getting together? What is it exactly that we're trying to solve or resolve? Is there a specific question? I find agendas very helpful to get down so I'm not just calling a meeting to call a meeting because, oh, maybe we should talk about this, but there's actually some really important purpose to that, as well as looking at the amount of time one is scheduling for a meeting so that people feel like their time is being utilized well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kate. Thanks for bringing that up. That purpose of the meeting is very key, and that agenda to really make sure that it's the best use of time and space.
Yeah, and I would also add, and this is a comment I made in the chat box too, that sometimes maintaining that face-to-face relationship and team culture is a valid reason to meet, even if there aren't, you know, specific discrete outcomes. But that's kind of up to you to weigh the value of that.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to the next question. That was great thoughts there. In your current role, what barriers exist in fostering ongoing relationships with colleagues? To the top of mind for myself as I look at this question, and it was just noted in the chat box, is time. It's really prioritizing and making that time is probably the biggest piece that I can think of.
Yeah, I would think so, and you know, it's being respectful of everybody's time too. But a little bit of time in building a relationship can reap huge rewards, and so it's time well spent.
Very good. What do you feel is the biggest challenge in project management? My initial thought on that, after hearing a lot of the tips from Josh, is the follow-through from folks on tasks that need to get done in order to keep the project moving forward. And so being able to have that accountability piece and do so in a way that you can still work really effectively and productively as a group, that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, you know, as the project manager, it may be the most important thing in your portfolio at that point, but for the other members of the project team, they probably have 10 other things on their plate that are equally or more important, and so it's trying to capture that in a way that's effective.
Very good. At your institution, when have you seen strong project management demonstrated? I've seen a few institution-wide initiatives that have had constituents from across campus a part of them that have been really successful, and my perspective, and I think one of the main reasons is they were very transparent about their process, always posting updates, videos, recordings of meetings, like really, really transparent, and with timelines so everyone knew what was happening and where it was going.
I've sometimes found that some of the most effective projects are ones that are led by an individual that doesn't have a vested functional interest in the outcome. Sometimes you can get someone that may be advancing their department or unit's agenda, and if you bring in somebody external that's got good facilitation project management skills, they can really drive that through to completion without any biases or filters on it.
I also think some great teams that I've seen work together and projects that have gone through have really spent time putting together what is their team charge or what is the goal, and kind of putting together that focus and what would be their deliverables. I think sometimes we just want to solve a problem and we want to solve it quickly, but taking the time to structure that out can be really helpful when it comes to, going back to what Josh said, coming back to the time or the budget and going, okay, we need to refocus ourselves in order to keep people feeling like they're invested and like they're actually making a difference and getting something accomplished.
Very good. And then lastly, what are some ways you could envision using these tips in your current role?
Well, I know for me, being kind of a more type A outcome-driven person, it's a great reminder to take a little more time in building relationships and just chatting for chatting's sake instead of always having an agenda.
Yeah. Brian, you really reminded me that great tip about when you're in somebody's building, just taking the time to say hello. I think I used to do that a lot, and so that's a great reminder to do that more. I think just those casual conversations, but going to somebody else's space and having that face-to-face and showing them that you care and that you're taking time out of your day, I think is a really great indicator of the relationship that you care about the relationship with the other person.
I appreciate you saying that, Kate. Yeah, and I think some pieces that I've been looking at this for myself is on that project management stuff that you were sharing, Josh. There's a few things, and it comes back to what I mentioned already, that accountability piece and how best to, hold people accountable, but do so in a way that can keep things moving productively and have the group still function and work really well together. Well, are there general questions that folks have that you would like to write in? Here's our contact information for myself and Josh, that we're always more happy to talk more about this topic or any other topic. Please just let us know, but any other questions folks have that you want to type in for our time this morning.
And while we're letting folks think of questions, thanks so much for joining our webinar. This is a great way to just get a little bit of knowledge from your desk. And thanks, Josh and Brian, for taking the time to chat with us this morning. Our next webinar is going to be on June 6th by a colleague from University of Calgary about their insurance program. So we will get some more information online about that, but please join us for that.
And if there are no more questions, at some point this presentation will be posted online, so if you want to watch it again or share it with your colleagues, that will be available. And thanks for your time this morning.
Yes, thank you all very much, and thank you, Kate, and the committee for helping make these webinars possible. Really appreciate it.
Have a great weekend.